I'm here with Olivia Kavanaugh, line producer on Anora, and we're going to be talking about how to find the right department heads, jumping on opportunity for soft prep, and making the most out of a small budget, and even being flexible on a production. Thank you for joining me. And can you tell us a bit about yourself and a little bit about maybe Anora?
Hi, thanks for having me. My name is Olivia Kavanaugh. I was line producer on Anora, and prior to that, on a film called Memory by a director named Michelle Franco. Worked on a number of other films in New York, New Jersey, Atlanta, and yeah, thanks for having me here today.
Soft prep was a really important aspect for Anora. Can you start by explaining some of the key takeaways for other line producers at how to most effectively and successfully kick off soft prep and using Anora as an example for that?
I think any line producer will tell you the same, that getting soft prep started as early as possible really can't be underestimated. Being prepared and establishing relationships within the community that you're working with and having time to carefully consider the ingredients that you're choosing to make the movie, from department heads to cast and locations, is really everything.
And you really had to get on the ground and get to know the community, right?
Yeah, so Nora was based in Brighton Beach and Manhattan Beach, Mill Basin. And on Anora, Sean and his producers are LA based. And we all agreed it was really important to, get somebody started with boots on the ground really as early as possible. So I actually was hired and began soft prep on Anora 5 or 6 months prior to filming. And so every week I was going to Brighton Beach, meeting people, finding locations, making connections. And I actually studied Russian in college and studied abroad there a bit. So having a little rough Russian language ability also helped kind of get our foot in the door in many places.
And with being on location, right? Like, what are some of the important steps with bringing in a location manager in the soft prep process?
I think when budget is limited, like on Anora, often the other producers and I end up doing a lot of the preliminary scouting and locking in the bigger locations early before we're able to bring on a location manager. In the case of Anora, for example, Sean Baker, our director, had early on sent me a link to a Zillow listing for the Hero Mansion with the subject line just saying, "We must have this house." And it was one of my early interactions with him. So I was like, I gotta deliver on
The
this.
house.
It was a mission, and it was pretty difficult. We got kind of stonewalled by the realtor and had to just meet people in Brighton. Eventually I met like a nightclub owner whose brother's lawyer was the homeowner, and we found a way in. But on Anora, the Hero Mansion and was locked prior to our location manager coming in, and then I ended up location managing the Vegas unit. I believe we brought on our location manager full time about 10 weeks out, 8 to 10 weeks out. And his name's Ross Brodar, and he's awesome. I've worked with him many times. And when the torch was passed to Ross, he really hit the ground running and made further inroads into the community, finding the rest of our locations quickly. And a lot of the people that he met scouting and working the ground at Brighton Beach introduced us to a lot of residents who were valuable contacts for the movie in other ways.
For bringing somebody in, a location manager, 8 to 10 weeks, is that kind of the standard, or what is a good time frame for that?
It really depends on the movie. I mean, it depends on your budget. And I think in an ideal world, you have scouting starting as early as possible, like 16 weeks out, 20 weeks out. But if you can't afford it, then you kind of just have to roll up your sleeves. The producers do, and do what they can until you can bring someone on in earnest. And, we use our relationships and call. I was texting with our Ross, our location manager, and just other people I knew in the community to answer questions up until the time that Ross could really take over manning locations full time.
And scouting, I'm assuming, can end up being a pretty time consuming process, potentially. So, how much time would you say should be spent scouting before it becomes too much time?
I would say that the faster decisions can be made making locations, it's the better creatively and logistically prepared you're going to be when the shoot day comes around. I always kind of use a metaphor where prep feels like a maze full of doors, and the longer you wait to like pick a door to go through, the longer that you're in the dark about what's on the other side. So I always try to push the creatives to make decisions faster, knowing we can always keep scouting, we can always go back if we find out we have made a mistake, but you need to keep momentum, you need to keep moving forward. And for example, one time I was on another movie, and we waited and waited to pick a hero location. And by the time we actually picked it, we were 2 weeks into filming, and then found out shortly after deciding that the homeowners got cold feet during the legal back and forth and pulled out. So we were left in a tough place of needing to, scout on the weekends to find a new house, rework the whole script around the new location, spending extra on art department. So I would say it definitely pays at a certain point to, to not wait too long and to make decisions early.
What do you look for when staffing department heads? How do you know what the right experience or personality is going to be for any given film project?
When the budget is limited, it's really important to make sure that you're choosing people for every role who have a producerial mindset, who have a big picture mindset. You want department heads who really understand the scope and the limitations of the project that they're signing up for, but are still excited to do it, of course, and confident that, using their abilities, their resources and connections, they can pull it off. So I would say you really want every member of your crew, from the PAs to day playing crew, to have personal investment in the movie. And, when the going gets tough, as it always does, that internal motivation is there to get people to go the extra mile. And you want people, of course, who are also creative thinkers, who come with solutions and ideas to how to make it work, even when the requests might be last minute or difficult.
What really gets overlooked as a quality of a kick-ass department head?
In my opinion, a quality that's huge for me is our department heads who have an appreciation and a respect for the production team. When everyone's working with, short staff teams and tight budgets and not enough time, there's often a tendency for people to either blame production or lean on production to kind of carry some of their weight. Like, often on sets, my nickname becomes mom among some of the crew members, and I think there's a reason for that. There's nothing wrong with asking for help, of course, and I encourage it. But I think that there's a professionalism that is associated with people recognizing that the production staff is more understaffed, more overworked, and juggling the problems of every department, in addition to problems that nobody's thinking about, like cost reporting to the studio, record keeping for a tax credit, reporting to the unions, maintaining vendor relationships. And I would say on Anora, there were tons of kick-ass department heads who really embodied a self-sufficiency that I really appreciated. Just to name a few, Annie Johnson, our makeup department head, she drove her whole crew every day to 2-hour pre-calls. I don't think she ever slept. Brian Elliott, our production supervisor, covered the job of about 3 people and kept the machine running every day. Chris Hill, our gaffer, drove himself from Florida. Steve Phelps, our production designer, and his team just seemed to approach every limitation as a motivating force. Yeah, I think a lot of people in that movie approached problems from the place of how much time do we have? How much money do we have? How can we get this done? Rather than, we need this to get there.
It's a real testament to the quality of the film in the end with the people that you bring in these positions, because you're not going to end up with the film that is currently as recognized as Anora is if you don't have these passionate, dedicated people behind the scenes who are all fully on board with bringing this project together.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you feel that there is a best order to bring on department heads, or not so much?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that an order of hiring is really important. It helps to have a production designer on early, of course. It helps to have, a DP on, director of photography on early, but the sooner the better for everyone. But at the same time, I think it's really more about making sure you have the right people rather than when you're bringing them on.
Let's talk about the importance of being flexible and ready to move on a dime. How did that mentality benefit you during the production of Anora?
It was huge on Anora. It was huge for our director to be able to be flexible every day. Flexibility is really tantamount to creative freedom, and the key to achieving both is really minimalism, having a small footprint. So, heavy equipment, trucks, a larger crew, they all take planning and permitting, and they're heavy. They take time to move from one place to the next. So, for example, if you're filming on a beach and your scene is, seagulls at sunset, then on the day you're behind schedule and the seagulls fly down the beach and the sunset moves out of frame, you're stuck. If you have heavy equipment, if you have all these trucks, a big crew. On the other hand, if you're operating out of cargo vans, you have a skeleton crew and you don't have any heavy equipment, you say, okay, we don't want to be here. Let's go there, and you're able to kind of chase the magic of what's happening in front of you.
So, how do you keep the flexibility mindset when there are also numerous rules that you have to adhere to? I mean, it's nice to say you want to be flexible, but there are a lot of regulations and rules that are in place that can make that challenging.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, there's countless limitations to working with locations. New York City requires permits to be submitted a week in advance. You know, when you're working with businesses and you can't afford to buy them out, then you have to work around their business hours. Homeowners, you know, you're going to buy out their home for a certain amount of weeks and then they want to come back and you have to
Mm.
turn it back to the way that it was before you came in. So there's really no easy answer into how to deal with the obstacles besides just that it's a total game of chess. It's a dance. It's, you know, you're trying to think ahead and be respectful of the people you're working with and the world going on around your film. You have to be very careful with communication and be clear that, hey, we're going to come someday this week and we'd like to come for 5 hours. You know, when are the windows that it would be okay for us to do that? When is the latest we can let you know? Do you need to, you know, hire staff to be there? And it's always a challenge. And, you know, we definitely did have some uncomfortable phone calls with the mayor's office asking for last minute permit changes, but you have to kind of rely a little bit on luck being on your side to and just do what you can and hope that the universe meets you halfway to just make the movie work and, you know, allow you to be as flexible as possible.
It's not easy to be flexible because you have to put yourself in a back seat a lot of times, let things take their course, and then be able to react to them effectively and efficiently.
Absolutely. And when you're dealing with the crew as well, it's like you have to really be taking into considerations what every department had, you know, what every department needs to know in advance. And so we had to be very clear with our crew from the beginning, you know, hey, the schedule for this film is TBD until the morning of every day. And of course, that conversation, you know, everyone can say, okay, great, but we still need to plan weeks in advance for what's on the schedule. Like an example of one item while making Anora that stands out is we needed to chase snow. There's a, you know, the ending scene, it was critical to have snow. There's also a scene at the mansion, it was critical to have snow. And we were filming in January and February in New York. So we're assuming it's going to snow at some point. When it snows, these scenes are what we're going to do that day. So we may not know until the night before, 2 days before. We had to just be ready to pivot and go do those scenes. And of course, you know, at a certain point, like, well, we lost our time at the house. We had to redress the house, but we thought to ourselves, well, if we need to go back and get the snow scene after we've left the house, then we'll just send a couple people. You know, we'll ask the homeowner if we can dress, you know, this corner of the room for half a day. And, you know, you just kind of rethink how to do things in a more minimal way to be able to get what you want. But of course, it actually never snowed, which, you know, just was another story that creating snow created a whole other set of problems for us.
How can a line producer shift mentality between projects when it comes to, say, a budget size? The flexibility aspect is really important, obviously. And so, for those working on a small budget film, how do they shift that into going into a larger budget?
Actual filmmaking really only gets easier. You have moving from a small budget to a large budget, you have more tools, you have more time, more support. The different challenges that come with bigger budget filmmaking are just navigating the politics and bureaucracy and egos that come with more money. So, and then just trying to hold on to ultimately the collective goal is walking away with a good film. And navigating those things is very real and important, and they need to be handled just as carefully as any other problem, and with the same amount of respect. But it does become more and more challenging to kind of keep the eyes on the prize and keep the money on the screen when you move bigger.
How about going the other direction, coming from a big budget to a small budget?
Myself, I guess I'm a kind of an odd case where I was trained as a line producer's assistant on larger films. So I worked on as an assistant on films between $30 and $100 million for the first 4 years of my career. And when I moved out of that and jumping ship into all of a sudden being on the first indie film sets that I've ever been on, that experience was really exhilarating. And, you know, I think right away you realize, wow, there's a lot less opportunity to delegate because there's only two people over there and, you know, I only have one person helping me. You really end up getting more involved in the day-to-day decision making. And in prep on a smaller movie, you're building the machine that makes your movie, and it's a smaller and more efficient machine. You're probably not building a lot of sets on a stage, so making the world of your film smaller is going to save you a lot of time, a lot of headache. Pick a neighborhood where you can have 80% of your locations, where you can have your production office. I think prioritizing staying small, nimble, decisive, so that all of the little money you have can be put to the screen, which is really common sense, but just I think with smaller films, like focusing on quality over quantity, as we talked about earlier, like hiring a small team of really creative teammates who are comfortable wearing a lot of hats is just going to make the difference in whether something is done or done and everyone walks away being like, we did that really well.
When it comes to post-production or after production wraps, like how does a line producer stay successfully involved in the process?
Definitely depends on the line producer and on the project. It's common for a line producer to be hired only for the prep and production period and then to disappear after wrap. And then usually a post production supervisor will take over in tandem with the producers to bring the movie the rest of the way. I always like to stay involved. And so, in my experience, like if you, as a line producer, take initiative to stay involved, then the post team is happy to have the added support. And yeah, with projects like Anora, I make it that are like important and near and dear to me. I try to make it clear from the beginning that I'm happy to stay involved through the end with the budget, the staff, the vendor conversations, however I can be helpful. On Anora, our producer Alex Coco ended up doing the bulk of the post supervising responsibilities, and he did a great job. But I tried to be as helpful as I could to bring that all the way through the finish line. Then there isn't always a budget for it. If there isn't a budget to compensate your time, I think if you care about the project and you can and you have the time to donate, then you just choose to show up for it, and then they're happy to have you.
How do you kind of stay on top of the budget at a distance?
Staying on the phone calls with the producers, the studio, the accountant, staying involved in the conversations, and offering to be the one to take over certain conversations, take things off of other people's plate. So on Anora, through the end, I was having negotiations with our post house Photochem and with Postworks, who was doing our scanning in New York. And like anything, you just stay, if you want to stay involved, then you're in the fold and you're involved.
What does 2025 look like for Olivia Kavanaugh?
That's a good question. I think I'm definitely, after Anora, I've been trying to be a little bit more selective onto what features I sign on to, because you pour so much, right, of yourself into a feature when as a line producer. It's a lot of time, it's a lot of gray hairs, and I'm fortunate enough to be able to have commercials and budget builds and certain things that can keep the lights on for a time until I need to do a feature again. So right now I'm just kind of waiting for something special to jump out as something I really want to throw myself into. So far there are a lot of scripts out there that are kind of in the process of locking in their financing, locking in their dates. So I'm hopeful that one of those clicks in soon for 2025 that I'm excited for, and then I can jump onto. And I'm excited to hopefully do something outside of New York. As much as I love it, it does feel like there's a wave of films going abroad or going to other states, just for the feasibility, like the cost effectiveness of going into other places. And I would love to kind of broaden my horizons too. So hopefully something to take me away from here for a movie would be fun as a change of pace.
After the success of Anora, and we'll see how it does during the awards season. It's a front runner for Best Picture, a number of other awards. So fingers crossed for you. Pretty solid thing to have on your production CV, I'd say.
Yeah, it's you never really understand what you're making while you're making it. So it's been just overwhelming to see the response, and it's the best feeling in the world to have friends and family reaching out to you, telling you how much they loved something that you worked on. So it's great.
Olivia, thank you so much for speaking with me today. It's been super informative, a lot of great information here. And if there is anybody out there who would like to get in touch with Olivia, you can find her on IMDb, or you can shoot her a connection request on LinkedIn, which I will include the profile for her below this video. So Olivia, thank you again. Hope to speak to you again sometime.
Thank you so much for having me.